Welcome to the Film Illiterates podcast, your home for uninformed, unfiltered, ill-advised movie talk.
Don't do that.
I forgot how loud my mic is today. I'm recording on a different computer for those listening, so my audio is out of control.
Yeah, it's all cranked up to 11, as they say.
Cranked up to 11.
Yep.
Speaking about banned movies,
Mm-hmm.
today I should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Joe, there's Nate and Alex. You know us all if you've listened to our podcast before. For you first-time listeners, I'm sorry.
This is
You're
not
sorry.
normally how it starts out.
I know we're giving a poor show for a first impressions, but trust me, we are just as bad as you think we are. So for Nate's pick this week, he wanted to do a Battle of the Bands, 2 films. We'll be talking about them, pitting them up against each other, talking about the different bands and the different types of movies that they made based on these albums. So one of them is going to be 1975's adaptation of Tommy by The Who, and the other is going to be the 1982 adaptation of Pink Floyd's The Wall. So we will see which movie comes out the victor in this special Film Illiterates edition of Battle of the Bands. For this episode, we are going to rock and roll because we have a special podcast today in which Nathan has been nagging us to talk about this for a long time. And now, Nathan, we are finally going to talk about Tommy versus The Wall. Are you excited?
Yes, I am very excited. Alex, are you excited?
Yeah.
Alex is the movie guy, and he's like the least enthusiastic.
I know, he's the most, but you're the music dude. Come on, what the hell?
So I will say off the bat, like, I'm the music guy, but like specific music and rock opera is not necessarily one of those genres that I'm super into.
Well, this was a waste.
I-
I did this for you.
Did you watch Phantom of the Paradise, Alex?
No,
Did you
No,
watch
that
our
was-
episode, our video on Phantom of the Paradise?
probably.
At some point.
Was that one you did with Nick or with Nate?
That was with Nick.
Yeah.
Okay, I did watch it, but that was also released like how many years ago?
Yeah.
fucking know.
We also have
Yeah.
a track record of like releasing this stuff like way after it's been produced. So
Our VidCon episode.
that VidCon episode took like, what, 2 years?
This was
to do?
about 2 years, I think. Our next episode that I'm currently editing, we recorded during pandemic, and we did a whole kind of pandemic shtick. But now that we're coming out of pandemic, I'm going to have to put a disclaimer over it.
Pretty much,
that
yeah.
we filmed it during pandemic.
But we're not talking about pandemic, are we? We're talking about music.
We're talking about Battle of the
Yeah.
Bands. So Nate, why don't you go ahead and kick us off here? Take the wheel, if you will. Take the microphone, if you will.
I will take this microphone, yes.
Tell us what made you decide to pick these 2 movies, and what would you like to talk about these ones specifically?
Originally I did this for Alex because, you know, him being the music guy, we never talk about music on this podcast at all. And it's like, okay, what's the best of both worlds? And I thought, you know what? There's a little bit of something here for all of us that we might like or enjoy. And I guess what I just wanted to know is which one we kind of favored the most, you know, of our tastes and interests. So yeah, I decided to pick the 2 rock operas that are most well known in the rock, you know, history Hall of Fame, and that is Pink Floyd's The Wall and Tommy by The Who.
So you had seen both of these movies before, correct?
Yes. So there's a little bit of a history behind both of these movies. I will actually say that one of my first exposures with Pink Floyd's The Wall was when I was a kid. My dad introduced it to me, the album itself, not the movie, because, you know, who would want to show this movie to their 10-year-old son?
Yeah.
But I remember listening to the album, got freaked out because it was just more than I could handle. And then I just waited until I was in college to revisit again. I was like, okay, let me try it. Saw the movie, and I was like, okay, that happened. That was a thing. I will keep this in my memory bank. Tommy, on the other hand, this was actually discovered on a late night screening with me and my brother. We were just like flipping through TCM, and we were watching, I think, the segments of like, you know, Cousin Kevin, the school bully segment, and Uncle Ernie that
Jeez.
had just come on, and we were just cracking up. We didn't know what to make of this. We were like, what is this? And we just had to stick around for the rest. So already from that, you can get it. Both of these movies have different vibes, different feels, and we'll see which one is better.
So to give people a little bit of an introduction to both of these movies, for those who may be unfamiliar, so Pink Floyd's The Wall. Well, first, both of these are rock operas, in which they're basically musicals.
Pretty much, yeah.
So both of these films were based on albums that had already been released prior to the film's construction.
That is correct. Yes. The Tommy by the Who was released, I believe, in 1969. Actually,
yeah, so 69, and then The Wall was 79.
Mm-hmm. So just 10 years apart, and both of them were kind of like the germination of like a single band member of each band. I think Pete Townsend was like the mastermind behind Tommy.
Yep.
And Pink Floyd's Roger Waters was the mastermind behind The Wall. So both of them are kind of like passion projects, kind of have a lot of like personal connotation to them. So, I mean, the fruits of their labor show, but what went into making the movie versions of that is kind of interesting.
So to make sure that things don't get too muddled and we give each film its due, I think what we're going to do here is we'll talk about each film individually for a little bit. And then after we've kind of gotten acquainted with the films and our opinions of the films, then we'll talk about them as they contrast with each other and just kind of the rock opera genre in general and how these films work within that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was kind of thinking too. So I think if anything, if it's all right with you guys, I would like to start off with Tommy and then move into Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Let's do it.
Show plays a mean pinball.
So Tommy, I'll give a little brief synopsis of Tommy, just for those who don't know what it's about. So based on the acclaimed rock opera by The Who, Tommy tells the story of a boy who becomes deaf, dumb, and blind after witnessing his father murdered in front of his own eyes. Despite his many misadventures with an abusive cousin, an illicit uncle, and an acid queen, he becomes the master at the game of pinball and gains the following from those who see him as a symbol of revolution. So yeah, the movie was directed by Ken Russell, and is starring actually pretty much all the members of The Who, with Roger Daltrey being the lead role of Tommy, and Margaret as the mother, Oliver Reed as the lover, and many other cameos from other celebrities like Eric Clapton, Elton John, Keith Moon, Tina Turner, and Jack Nicholson.
That was such a weird thing to see him in. Out of like everyone, I was not at all expecting to see Jack Nicholson show up in Tommy.
That was
so weird.
The best cameo ever. And literally that is his actually singing voice as well. He actually sings in this. It's not lip synced.
Jack Nicholson is in this movie, and he was also in the original version of Little Shop of Horrors before it became a musical.
Oh, see, there you go. He has his background in musical theater, you know.
Well, I mean, he was in the non-musical version of Little Shop of Horrors.
That's true. Oh. That's true. So I guess I'll start off really quick. What are your guys' impressions of Tommy? Like, as far as me, this was both of your first time viewing this movie? Or Joe, yes. I think you actually saw this a little bit longer.
This is my first time watching both of these.
Ah, okay. So what were your thoughts?
I kind of loved Tommy.
I would have thought so, yeah.
I don't have much experience, I guess, with rock operas. I mean, when I think of rock operas, I think of, does Phantom of the Paradise count?
A little bit. It's a bit more of a satire.
Not really, but it's like I don't think of true rock operas. I think of kind of 80s musicals that have kind of a rock aesthetic. You know, Phantom of the Paradise. You've got Little Shop of Horrors, which has that kind of rock pop kind of feel to it. So these two movies were my first time really watching a true rock opera. And first thing that struck me about Tommy was how it is surreal. You get that Ken Russell flavor there for sure, because he loves to throw in some surrealist imagery and go for symbolism in a very big way. And he goes overboard with that.
Very much overboard, yeah. So if anyone's not familiar with Ken Russell, he's kind of he was a bit of a pioneer back in the 70s as well as early 80s, with several of like kind of almost like movies that would have not been picked up by any studio at the time. And he just like put a lot of, you can tell his passion is behind this. I think he actually did another movie with Roger Daltrey called Litzomania that came out the same year. And it's all kind of like in the same kind of tone, same kind of vibe, same kind of, surrealist, eccentric kind of style, but it kind of works for his, forte.
A little interesting tidbit, semi-related. A couple years ago, I watched Ken Russell's The Devils,
Oh boy.
Mhm.
And as everyone knows, The Devils is an infamously kind of shocking, blasphemous kind of movie, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much been banned by the church for several reasons.
but when it comes to watching movies, I'm not a superstitious person.
Mhm.
But finishing The Devils, and with Oliver Reed is in it, very big, over the top movie. The next day or later on that day, unrelated to that, I got the worst stomach bug of my life.
Oh,
And I was laid out, throwing up sick for the next 24 hours. And when the last thing you watched was The Devils, it just like that messes with your head, man.
seriously, that okay? So you kind of are almost kind of coming in this dreading, like, oh great, it's a Ken Russell movie.
Well, no, I loved Ken Russell movies. I saw the one with the tank. The guy goes into the tank, and Altered States.
Altered States, yes.
I love Altered States. It's fantastic. But then I'm just saying, turning on Tommy and seeing it's a Ken Russell movie and seeing Oliver fucking Reed like on the screen, I was like, I'm not ready for this. I can't go through another round of this, man.
Honestly, anything with Oliver Reed kind of makes my stomach turn a little bit too. And yeah, even when I kind of recognized it was Oliver Reed, I was like, okay, let's see where this goes.
Back to Tommy though.
Mm-hmm.
It is the movie is basically sensory overload. The movie,
Mm-hmm.
every song is cranked up to 11.
Yeah.
I had to watch this with my earbuds in, and so
Mhm.
everything was just blasting into my ears, and with
Mhm.
the set pieces and the colors being thrown at you at the screen. It's like every single song is like the show ending showstopper. At the end of a movie, of any other musical. That's every single song.
Yeah. Everything is kind of like built up to like a big climax at the very end, but especially with every single piece.
Yeah, and I was initially worried because I was loving it. I was into it, but I was thinking, man, I'm going to get burnout really quickly.
Mhm.
And somehow I didn't. I mean, that may hit you. That may have been a different case for both of you guys.
It was kind of interesting. Like as I was watching it, I felt the same way. Like, okay, there was a high for a lot of the first half of the movie, but then it came to that second half and I just felt myself dipping a bit.
See, I thought I was going to get that, and I didn't. And I think it's because the movie kept on twisting and turning in different directions I didn't see coming. And it was interesting how, even though it took drastically different directions, it took left turns every, say, I don't know, half hour, but it's still connected back to itself. And I especially loved, I'm not going to go into spoilers, but at the very end of the movie, it connects all the way back to the beginning. I thought that was kind of nice. And there's a song later on that references back to a song from earlier in the movie. So I liked that there was a narrative flow, a very clear narrative flow. There was a lot of surrealist imagery, which didn't alienate me, which we'll talk about more about that when we get to the wall. And and it told a clear-cut story. It had a lot of cool visuals, and every single song was just right there for me. So yeah, I had a hell of a time with this film.
Cool. So Alex, what about you?
Yeah.
You mentioned this was your first time. What were your first impressions?
Yeah, so this was the first time watching the movie. This is the first time actually listening to, because I listened to both Tommy and The Wall, the albums.
Mhm.
It was the first time actually listening to either of the band's albums all the way through.
I'm actually glad you did your homework. That was one thing I was asking for both these guys is if you had not listened to these albums ever before, listen to them, because it's kind of like part of the whole experience of figuring out, okay, how was this adapted? What worked, what didn't? But good for you, man. I'm glad you listened to them.
Yeah, and I guess I will say, like, I generally am I think a little bit more of a fan of The Who rather than Pink Floyd.
Mhm.
Not to say that I have any real major disdain for Pink Floyd. They do genres that I'm not a big fan of, and kind of same thing for The Who. But for me at least, The Who is my interest in them is kind of anchored in like Keith Moon's drumming. Yeah, so watching Tommy, it was kind of like Joe was saying. It's like each song is like the climax of the movie, and after a while, I feel like it is a bit too much to kind of take in. Like I felt like I did get a bit worn out. There were lower parts and there were higher parts, so you did get a little bit of a lull in between. While I say like every song's kind of the climax, it's building up to this like great crescendo of each scene. How high that crescendo goes and whatnot, and how hard it crashes is different for each scene. So you will get stuff that's a little bit easier to kind of more palatable and to get through. And then, yeah, you will get stuff like the pinball scene that's just huge and
Oh, yes.
incredible
Mhm.
and whatnot. And so it does give you sort of give you a little bit of a few breaks here and there. But for the most part, like once it starts going, it just doesn't stop. And you gotta like dig in and like hold on for the ride.
Yeah, I will actually kind of agree with you guys. Like all the music definitely has its own flavor and its own tone. And I'm guessing you guys kind of notice this. If anyone has actually will watch this movie, you'll notice that in the middle section, when there's the different characters who come in and join in Tommy's narrative, they have different singers and rock stars of the time kind of like chiming in. You have Eric Clapton playing the preacher. You have Tina Turner playing the Acid Queen. You have Elton John playing the pinball wizard. And each of them bring their own styles to the music and just amps it up. But you're right, everything in there is cranked up to like almost like rock star level. Even like as it gets later into the movie, it does do that. And I think that's just what Ken Russell wanted to preserve of each song. Each song kind of has its own like show number style to it. And it's not dependent or it doesn't like bleed into anything else. So just make it big and make it as eclectic as possible.
Yeah. And I think it was a cool choice to have each of the characters in the movie. They're doing the singing. So it's not like they're just laying the album on top of the picture and you hear Roger Daltrey the entire time. I thought it was cool that they had each of the different characters kind of singing their own parts.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty rad, rad choice.
Yeah, I mean, because like in the original album, and you probably picked this up, Alex, is it's all Roger Daltrey singing for all the characters.
Yeah.
Which kind of is interesting. But when I did some research into it and why Pete Townsend kind of like didn't want to have different voices for all the different characters, it's because, you know, you look at the character Tommy, this kid who becomes deaf, dumb, and blind for half his life, then has an awakening. All of this is through his interpretation.
Yeah.
And it's just him kind of like interpreting what he's experiencing, what he's feeling, what's going on around him. He can't like put a name to anyone until like his eyes are open and everything's done. But it is kind of interesting, like how they adapted it for that. So yeah.
Yeah, like with the album, I mean, you're seeing it through Tommy's eyes, or I guess with the album, you're hearing it through Tommy's voice. Might be a bit better of an
pretty much
explanation.
Yeah,
but yeah, with the movie, yeah, you do get, you know, each character doing their own thing. Though I will say I was happy when he finally got his voice back and we got to hear Roger Daltrey sing. That was nice, but I was waiting for that. And as much as because not everyone is in the movie is great as singing, so it was nice to actually have the front man for the band pull his own weight.
I was reading on the Wikipedia that apparently Oliver Reed had been in, I guess, Oliver the musical, and they had redubbed his songs with someone else.
Yep, exactly. Yep. He's not the best of singer. His voice is not the smoothest. So, but he definitely brings something to this movie. I can't say if it's good or bad, but it's just when he pops on the screen, I'm like, oh hey, it's Oliver Reed. Damn.
I actually really liked him in the movie.
Yeah,
I thought he was great.
Oliver Reed's a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
He's a legend.
He kind of brings that sleazeball kind of like persona to the character. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is great. Although one of the performances I thought was great in this movie was Anne Margaret as the mother, just because she was flipping back and forth so much. She was going from like, you know, drama queen kind of like in the very beginning. And then suddenly she's like, oh, one of my favorite scenes is the champagne scene, because she's like all going out with that. And then like when they spewing like foam and chocolate syrup into it, and she's just going at it. I'm like, she must have been high or something, because what the hell?
Yeah, and she gets so much screen time throughout the movie that she really like is a huge anchor for the acting performances. Yeah,
this was like a big breakthrough like role for her apparently. So I guess she was just soaking it in as much as possible.
Yeah, she went all out and it was great.
One interesting change from the album to the movie I was reading about was that in the album, or in the original story, it was the the returning father who was away from war, and he comes back several years later to find his wife with another man. And in the original album, the father's the one who kills the lover.
Yes.
He killed the Oliver Reed character. And in the movie, they changed it where Oliver Reed is the one who kills the dad.
Yeah. If you guys kind of notice, like for anyone who listened to the album and watched the movie, a lot of the narrative in that was changed. Like a lot of like the songs and their placements and what gets repeated. It kind of changes like where everything goes. But that was kind of one thing I wanted to actually ask you guys. Like, did you guys notice that alteration or that switch, or when it did, was it that kind of like a big game killer?
I think I noticed the one Joe pointed out, but I don't think going into it, I figured, it's not going to be a perfectly literal adaptation of the album, and they're likely going to have to change stuff just to make it work on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I didn't really. I'd listened to the album prior, but I'm not super familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't off the bat notice many other changes to it.
Mm-hmm.
Was Bernie's Holiday Camp on the album?
Bernie's Holiday Camp was not on the album. That was originally Tommy's Holiday Camp. Like it's like one of the last songs of the album. They used the same melody, but they just like wrote new lyrics for it to be like a earlier number to explain like the lover and how the mother came to find him. And that's like, I think the big change that is from the original album.
Okay. Cause that was the point in the movie when I think I kind of realized I was going to love this movie. Because prior to that, you'd had the opening song number with the mom and the dad,
mm-hmm.
and they're kind of their love ballad and the story about him going off to war. And then they go into Bernie's Holiday Camp, and you introduce Oliver Reed, and all of a sudden you do have these crowds of people all choreographed together, singing the song together. And that was the point when it hit me that, this is going to be a full-on musical,
mm-hmm.
and everything is going to go along with that. You'll have the story told through this way. That's when I realized that I was going to be fully on board, because it was actually going to, each scene was going to flow into the other, and we were going to be telling us this story. I was a little bit worried that because a lot of times with albums,
mm-hmm.
the music will be kind of, I don't want to say samey, but it's like, okay, this is a Who album. All the songs are going to sound like the Who, they might have different variations of the Who. But this was like a very different, like a much different song with different singers, kind of giving you a completely different feel, but it still told the same story.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's like the one thing that I kind of saw in the adaptation from the album to the movie that worked for this is like how each song had its own different flavor, had its own different style, and it wasn't anything that changed the consistency of it. I think the original album was consistent of that because it all wanted to feel like, it's all part of the same thing. But with this is because they brought in so many different people. You bring Eric Clapton, who's a bit more psychedelic with his guitar. You have Tina Turner, who is definitely more about the R&B. You have Elton John, who's definitely a little bit more kind of country pop infused. And they're all bringing that to those renditions of the songs, and it works. It brings it up to that, as you said, Joe, 11 style.
My hot take about Elton John in this movie, the shoes were a mistake.
So that was one of my notes. I'm pretty sure they didn't need to like bring a costume or have a costume for Elton John. Like I'm sure he probably brought his own stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
My specific problem with the shoes, the shoes were fantastic. I love the shoes. Problem was that he was stuck in those the entire song, and he wasn't able to do anything else and just stomp around and belt out his songs, and his costume was, it was a great costume, but it kind of only gave him one very specific look and thing to do, and he didn't really have anything else to do. Whereas, Jack Nicholson in his scene was able to move all around about the room and use props and all that.
That's true, but the interactions was a little bit different as well.
That's
also,
true.
I think also was it Elton John didn't really want to be in the movie. I think that was the case. Like he only wanted to do Pinball Wizard just because he knew that it would be a big single for him. But I think originally he did not want to be part of this movie. So him staying in one place, I think is perfectly okay with it. But with Tina Turner's segment when she's doing the Acid Queen, like,
oh my God,
that song was amazing.
No, but she's still dancing on the room like Tina Turner style. I'm like, okay, this is worth it. This is worth having her in the movie just for that.
And the whole syringe Iron Maiden getup they had, and the way they shot that, that was such a beautiful scene.
I was kind of worried every time they would open. It's like, okay, what's going to be in there next? Like skeletons with snakes. Okay,
that was the most Ken Russell scene in the movie, in my opinion. I mean, like that was stuff straight out of Altered States.
Yes, it was. Oh, yes. As far as that goes, what did you guys think of the visuals of this movie?
I liked how so I mean I've already talked about how much I love the visuals, but one thing symbolically I liked was how that visual of the pinballs specifically was repeated throughout the movie, even before Tommy was born, when his mom is working in the factory making missiles for the war.
Yeah,
those little balls, come back to the pinballs later on.
Yeah,
I thought that was kind of a nice touch, how stuff like that kept repeating.
Yeah, one of the things I think like the Who's all about was kind of like trying to protest and be anti, establishment. And you can kind of see like how this is something that will trickle a little bit into with the wall when we talk about it. How there's a little bit of this kind of like protest kind of underscore going on, and how it's like, taking the elements of your society and how do you transform them into something else. So yeah, there's a little bit of that was going on in the set design. I'm glad you took note of that, Joe, because that was I was like, yeah, I was wondering when we were talking about that.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the visuals were, I guess, a bit much. Of course, it's meant to be like super over the top and whatnot, but I feel like visually it just gets it gets tiring.
It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like mostly my main point. Like the Acid Queen was just, I already don't like syringes and stuff like that. That creeps me out. So just like the Iron Maiden with all of them in there was just, I wasn't a big fan of that scene.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the song goes on a pretty long, but at the same time, so does the actual song in the album. Like it's a pretty long song.
Uh-huh.
I think this is the one thing I will say. I think with Ken Russell's style, it kind of tends to go overboard a bit. And that's, I guess, nothing against him. It's just, I feel like for me, it can kind of like make it, like you mentioned, Alex, a little overwhelming. And it's like, I don't think we need to be at 11 the whole time, because I think that's why I got burned out so quick watching the movie.
Mm-hmm.
This is a movie I want to see on the big screen. I think it could be a hell of an experience up there with that sound and the picture up there, on the biggest screen possible.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, you should probably ask the Firehouse if they can screen this with you guys. Like,
hell yeah.
So we're going to go on to the next movie on our list, and that is the 1982 adaptation of Pink Floyd's The Wall. Growing up fatherless after the war, with an overbearing mother and abusive school teachers, Pink, a reclusive singer, shuts himself off from the world inside his own mind, only to become the monster that he fears. The movie was directed by Alan Parker and starring Bob Geldof as Pink, Christine Hardgraves as the mother, Alex McAvoy as the school teacher, Eleanor David as the wife, and Bob Hoskins as the agent.
Bob Hoskins!
And out of all those, that's probably the one person that you guys recognize the most.
Yeah, that was weird seeing him in there.
He's like in it for just a short amount of time, but you're like, oh, hey, it's Bob Hoskins.
Hey, it's Mario.
I don't remember seeing him in the movie. Where was he?
He's the manager.
Yeah, he comes in at like the part for Comfortably Numb when Pink's all strung out and they try to get him strung up again.
Oh, okay, right. I remember that part. I don't remember him specifically, but I remember that part.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, this movie is kind of a little bit more endeared to me just because it was kind of like one I got exposed to at a very young age and then revisited again. And I don't know. I remember actually watching the movie, and the movie is weird in itself. Like there's animation, there's live action segments, there's not a very strong flowing narrative going on, or if there is, it's kind of hard to pick out. But I just remember just being mesmerized by like the visuals itself. If anything, just the animation's done by Gerald Schaaf. Like some of that is like the best animation I've ever seen. And even for its time, it was really good. But what were your guys' initial thoughts? Joe, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think I this is one that I respect more than I actually liked. I think I did give it like 3.5 stars on Letterboxd.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, when it started off, like the first maybe half hour, I thought, man, this is like a 5-star masterpiece of a movie. And this one did wear down on me after a while. And as it went on, I found myself losing my interest and losing interest and losing interest. It is a mesmerizing movie, very, I want to say, poetic kind of. But I was trying to figure out why it didn't grip me, because I watched The Wall about a week ago, and then I watched Tommy just a couple of days ago. And watching Tommy, I realized that the reason Tommy hooked me all the way through was because it was anchored by the story and the characters, and even though it went to all these wacky, crazy, surrealist places, I still was able to follow something. I was able to follow this game. I mean, if not even the story, I could follow at least this character's emotional and mental progression. In The Wall, I was kind of hooked on from the beginning, and they both open very similarly with talking about war and soldiers in the war dying. But eventually I just kind of lost any sort of narrative thread, and the visuals themselves, even though they were beautifully well done and very mesmerizing, they didn't hook me because I couldn't really connect them to anything tangible. And if you got something like really personal out of this movie, then that's great. But I didn't, so it didn't really keep me in it, you know?
Okay. Alex, what about you? What were your thoughts on this?
I starting out, I liked what I was kind of like what I was seeing. Towards the middle, it really lost me, and then it kind of picked back up a little bit more towards the end. I feel like this is one of the movies where style over substance kind of goes wrong.
Yep.
Like I was saying, there's a lot of really great shots in the movie, like one of the opening shots where they're like the camera's like coming down across Pink's arm up to like his, I think it was a cigarette, and then like looking to his face. I thought that was it's an incredible shot. There's so many like incredible visuals in the movie.
Oh yeah.
But it's just like, what does it mean?
It feels very personal and very symbolic. And whereas, you know, again, Tommy had a lot of symbolism in it and a lot of personal themes inside it. I was still able to connect to it outside of that. Whereas with The Wall, I didn't feel like I was in on the observations. And even though I could recognize, like, oh, this is symbolic of the, you know, destruction of war or fractured relationships, I recognize this, but I don't care.
Yeah. So I think I have an answer for this. And this actually goes into the production of each movie. So in my opinion, I think the reason why Tommy works is because Ken Russell just owned that vision. He brought the vision to The Who. They loved it. And he just owned it and said, yes, as bizarre, as colorful, as eclectic as it's going to be, this is my vision of the movie.
Yeah, Tommy is absolutely a Ken Russell movie to its core.
Exactly. Now with The Wall, if anyone has actually done some history on this movie, this is a production fiasco. Originally, what had happened was they came to Alan Parker, Roger Waters, the band member who wrote The Wall, came to him saying, I want this movie done this way. He was very controlling of his vision. He wanted to incorporate the animations from the tour that they did, a lot of just the stage performances that they did from the tour into the movie. And Alan Parker was like, I'm not going to have any of this. Okay, you asked me to direct this movie. I'm going to direct the movie. And that became kind of a bit of a picking fight because I guess they were going to have another director, the guy who did the animations, share directing credit. And in the end, what you kind of get is a movie that just really has no clear vision. Because I was watching it a second time, and I think my question was, okay, is this Pink's story or is this all of the youth story? Because there's like a lot of segments where you see a lot of the youth. There's like these big like stadium shots and like people kind of interacting with society. And it's like, it feels like this is trying to say this is your story, but it's not. It's just this one character. So why don't you stick to that? And it just goes back and forth too much.
And a lot of the symbolism felt very on the nose. I mean, you know, we don't need no education song that everybody knows, and you have the kids going into a literal meat grinder. I'm like, oh yeah, the kids are being indoctrinated to go into the meat grinder of society.
Right,
That's good. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. It's very on the nose. I get it.
Yeah, that was like one of my first notes. Like, this is going to be a really heavy-handed movie, isn't it? They're really just taking just a 2x4 just straight to the head and seeing like, this is what it means.
Taking a hammer to the head.
Yeah, speaking of hammers, the hammers with the stormtroopers marching, and that gets like really hammered into you.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, like as much as like some scenes really do just hammer it in, There's a lot of stuff where it's just like there is the school scene, and then there's the like the fascist whole like end part.
Well, maybe I should clarify that for anyone who hasn't seen the movie. So at one point, what happens in the movie is Pink kind of like he is basically isolated himself from the world. He gets, strung out so he can do a concert, but he envisions himself as a fascist leader who, in order to kind of like just cleanse himself of all these insecurities or fears, he says, just eradicate the world of all the things that aren't good with it. And that's where the movie gets kind of a little uncomfortable, I feel.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting how both movies go through, focus on characters who kind of go through emotional and spiritual and psychological dips into this, degrading depression, staring blankly ahead, and then they're reborn as these cult-like figures.
Yeah. It's just one goes in a more positive direction, one goes in a negative direction.
Well, I mean, about positive direction with Tommy, that didn't end up too well.
Well, I mean,
he tried.
He tried. He basically said, oh, okay, everyone loves me, so I'll love them back. I'll give them my experience and try to free them from the bonds of this world. But at the same time, it's kind of, it's not necessarily better. But I wouldn't say Pink's vision of himself becoming a leader is the greatest thing ever. So
no, definitely not.
When you see yourself as Hitler, there's probably something wrong there.
There is, yeah. What I kind of think is interesting is that both of these characters, kind of like including Tommy into this, is both these characters come from a place, as you mentioned, Joe, kind of like the aftermath of a war. Now, it's funny, in Tommy was originally written for 1921, right after World War I. But then it got adapted for the movie as World War II. Now, The Wall is kind of centered around this character who loses a father in World War II as well. And it's interesting how both of them kind of grew up fatherless or missing a certain father figure and trying to discover their identity again. And I think that's something that's a common thread I noticed in both movies. I just think you're right. Maybe The Wall was a little bit too hard on the nose on that. It's like, I miss my dad. My dad died in the war.
I think like, I guess I do want to clarify and like go back because I originally said like it's just like you're wondering what a lot of the visuals mean because the movie tries to put like forward not necessarily one but just several messages or like it tries to get out a lot of stuff, whereas like some stuff does come across really heavy-handed, like the kids in the school, whereas some of the more I guess some of the commentary that doesn't pertain more to like the world and like more social commentary and stuff like that. The stuff that deals a lot more personally with Pink is that's where it kind of can get a bit lost in the visuals and like matching what's going on with what you're seeing to what the movie is like trying to say or convey and whatnot.
Yeah, and one note I kind of put down here is it's interesting. Like you mentioned, Joe, Tommy is much more of like an actual musical where all these characters are singing. Whereas in The Wall, a lot of it is just taking the actual songs from the album and overlaying it as like a soundtrack. Like, no one's really singing halfway through this whole movie, unless it's like, Pink delivering his speech at his like fascist rally. But other than that, everyone's kind of just listening to this music in the background and it's just, overlaid on it. So there's a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah. And I think that was an interesting difference between the two of them. Whereas, one kind of plays out more as a musical and then the other one just kind of uses the album as a soundtrack to what's going on.
Although I will say, I know the animations made you guys a little uncomfortable at times, but I dig the animations.
I would say the animations are probably my favorite part of the movie.
Because those are the ones that felt like, okay, this is meant for The Wall. And originally those were the ones that they actually used for their world tour back in 1980. And that was the one thing that kind of like was kept in originally Roger Waters' vision. It's just like when he realized, we're just going to not use any of the footage that we had from the tour in this movie. That's where there's a bit of a disconnect. But even just the segues from the animations, like there's some good stuff in here. Like as kind of like, they're very explicit animations as well. This is not like some Disney family friendly shit or anything like that.
I want to put that on any animated movie that's not for kids. Just this isn't some Disney animated shit.
But this is good shit though. It's like, like I think that one segment, Empty Spaces with the flowers, still a piece of art when you think about it. or even just as weird as it is, the end with the trial and all the different characters who come in.
Jeez. Yeah.
Or Goodbye Blue Sky. Actually, I think that's one of my favorite. When you're showing the image of, was it the Union Jack turning into a bleeding cross? That's like, that is very poignant. I love that stuff.
Yeah, that was such a great segment. Oh my gosh, with the Iron Eagle destroying the Dove and then flying over, ripping up Britain.
Or even just like the people of England, just like almost like crawling like dogs and animals with the gas masks on into the tunnels. I'm like, oh, this is good. I love this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got to say, when the trial sequence happened, I felt really bad because that was kind of at the point where I had almost checked out of the movie, and I saw these visuals going on. And I said, "Oh man, I need to get like back into this because this is some good stuff now."
Honestly, I love the little screenshot that you sent to me of the judge. Like, well, this just showed up. I'm like, yep.
Interesting too. Apparently, because Nate, you had mentioned how much of a nightmare the whole production of the movie was. It sounded like Gerald Scarf, the animator, had a real tough time. I remember reading one part where he said when going into the studio every day, he'd bring a bottle of Jack just because he needed something just to kind of numb him.
Pretty
Oh my
much.
gosh.
Yeah. You can just imagine like how much bickering went behind with like Waters and Parker, and just, you can't do this. It's my vision, blah, blah, blah. And it became like this ownership battle. It's like, guys, you got to share this vision. You don't kind of feel that with Tommy. You watch Tommy, it's like, it feels like everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, it feels a lot more cohesive. Yeah,
it's interesting. I was reading. I mean, according to Wikipedia, Ken Russell said that he wasn't even really into pop and rock music before he made the movie, but he was interested in the story and the themes, about religion and all. Which, of course, he's interested in the religious themes because that's what Ken Russell does in his movies. But with The Wall, it just, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it other than what I've said. It didn't hook me. It's very beautiful to look at, and if you do get something personal out of it, I envy you, because that must be a hell of an experience. But I can't imagine I'll probably ever end up watching this one again.
Yeah, I think I might actually end up rewatching it because I feel like there's a lot to dig into with The Wall.
There is.
There's a lot you can really pull out of it, and I think one viewing is not necessarily enough.
Yeah, I think that's a big mistake for a lot of people who watch The Wall. Is like, it's so deep and it's so layered. Like it can't just be a one-time screening. Whereas with Tommy, you could probably get it all with just one screening. Like, it's fun, it's colorful, it's eclectic. It's a good time. Whereas The Wall, it gets too deep, and maybe that's with me. Like with The Wall, like I kind of got into college with this album and I studied the hell out of it. And it was just one of those things, like when I saw the movie, I'm like, oh, I get that. But you're right. For people watching the first time, a lot of it's going to go over their heads.
I will say, if like Criterion Collection or Arrow Video picked this up and gave it a beautiful Blu-ray transfer, I would probably pick it up and rewatch it then, because I was shocked to find this movie, I guess, doesn't have an official Blu-ray release.
No, it doesn't.
No.
Yeah,
which baffles me, because I mean, this movie was made for Blu-ray. It
was. I kind of am hoping eventually, sometime down the road, people like recognize these two as like, okay, they're hallmarks for a reason. I mean, that's kind of like the reason why I wanted us to watch, is just to see like, hey, these are part of like a cult cinema history for a reason. So I guess if it's all right with you guys, let's kind of go into the judging and see which movie delivered better on these three themes I wanted us to look at.
Oh yeah, I'll get my butthole mouth ready.
So themes. How well did these movies execute the themes that they wanted to go for? Because all of them kind of do touch on the same themes of abandonment during the war, isolation in oneself, the oppression of British society, and the transcendence from that pain. Which of these movies do you think did a better job of communicating that?
I think overall, The Wall did, though it's harder to pick out from there. The story of Tommy's, it's way more linear and easier to follow than The Wall is. So I feel like you can get a message from it a little bit easier, though I think The Wall overall has a little bit, just has more to say. It digs a little bit deeper.
I think The Wall if it does hit for you, I think it will hit harder than Tommy does. Tommy is a really good time, and Tommy does dig into a lot of really interesting themes. Ken Russell loves his commentary on religion, and there's a lot of that in here. The Wall, though, if it doesn't hit for you, it just comes off as kind of heavy-handed and nebulous. So I mean, I would say that Tommy probably does a better job getting across its themes, although I'd say that The Wall has more interesting themes if it does grip you.
Yeah, I kind of think, in my opinion, The Wall does have those images and it does have those themes well kind of like executed. I think because of just how, and we'll get into this, I think because like it wasn't consistent and you felt like it kept switching, it's not as successful. And I don't know, maybe I think I'm half and half on this. I think The Wall has stronger commentary on the themes of these scenes, but I think Tommy does a better execution, as you mentioned, Alex, with telling a straighter narrative that is like, okay, you understand the story, you're on board with the story, and the themes kind of, you understand it because you're following one central character. It's easy for you to be anchored into something. Whereas with The Wall, it's all over the place. It feels like it's addressing them on a broad scale, on an individual scale, and you can't figure out, okay, who's this really being addressed to? Even up to the very end with the image of the boys and the children collecting their own bricks to build their own walls right after the Blitz. It's kind of, it's there, but it's like, well, wait, wasn't this Pink's story or is this everybody's story?
I think in Tommy, the symbolism and the themes are still in service of the story. Even when it gets very ethereal and symbolic, it's still serving to get us into the mindset of the characters as characters.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in The Wall, everything is in service of trying to get a message across or trying to get themes or an emotional state across. So if it has to sacrifice any sort of narrative thread to pull off an interesting message, the movie will do that, which just isn't my thing.
Yeah. And maybe that's where I think the director was most frustrated, is because there was a lot going on in the script. And he just was trying to find the best way of how do I make Pink a relatable character? And you see it, but it's hard. It's hard to kind of like pick it out. All right, now musical adaptations. Going from the album on how the music and the songs were recorded and originally orchestrated for the album to how they were orchestrated and accompanied in the movies. Which one do you guys think did a better job?
I think Tommy did a better job because it's literally incorporated into the movie. Like the movie is a musical essentially, so it's where each character has singing their own parts and whatnot. So it's definitely incorporated well. Whereas The Wall, it's just soundtracked by the album, which isn't a bad thing. Like I think that's fine. But when you're adapting the album and into the movie and trying to fuse the two, Tommy did it much better by literally incorporating the characters into, or maybe the album into the characters, either way.
So looking at the question you have down here, Nate, how well did the music from the album transition to screen? I'm actually kind of torn on that.
Interesting.
So Tommy, like you guys mentioned, it's an adaptation of the album with a new cast recording, new kind of variations of the same music. And I was into it. Listening to the album afterwards, I was into it because, you know, they're good songs and it's The Who, and The Who is always great. But kind of halfway through the album, I caught myself thinking like, man, I really wish I was listening to the screen version of this.
Right.
Listening to the soundtrack recording. But then looking at Pink Floyd is literally just straight up the album into the movie. And afterwards, I was listening to The Wall, like the album, and I didn't get all the way through it just because I was kind of listening to it while doing other things. And I mean, Pink Floyd is great and I love their music, but the album is a lot. And I think seeing it with the visuals on screen enhanced it for me. And so seeing it with the visuals made it a little bit more interesting to me. And the music, just listening to itself, I'm like, this is great music, but it's not really my thing.
It's interesting that you kind of mentioned that. Like, you kind of like when you're listening to the album by The Who, you wanted to actually go back to the soundtrack, which I think is a success of the movie itself. It found a way to adapt those songs in a way to fit into the movie, but just crank it up to that level of like, we're going to take it beyond than what you got from the album. And isn't that the point of the movie, is to tell the story in a different light, in a different way? And I guess, Joe, that's where I'm kind of at, is I actually think Tommy did a better job at kind of like musical adaptation from the album to the screen. Because with The Wall, it's literally just the album on the screen. Like there's not a whole lot changed to it other than just what Alan Parker brought as far as his, production team did. Whereas with Tommy, it gets you kind of into the story. It gets you a bit of more of a clear idea of what's going on with like the Acid Queen or Pinball Wizard, just because you have those artists interacting with Tommy and interacting with the rest of the production. And it's just much more of a funner ride because of that.
I'm wondering how the album would have hit me if I listened to it before seeing the movie, because having seen the movie, listening to the album, it felt incomplete, honestly.
Really? Yeah, no, and
I felt like, oh, I get that there's a story here now, and I don't know if I would have gotten this beforehand. And I think the only song that I would listen to kind of just on its own was the Pinball Wizard song.
That's the, I guess, lead single you could say off of it, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I kind of listened to the album first before seeing the movie. And even after seeing the movie, it was bizarre to see Elton John sing it or Tina Turner sing it. But I digged it. I totally digged it.
Absolutely. Better versions of the same songs.
Exactly, yeah. Now, on to the last one. Which one did a better job, or whose vision was a little bit more concise with just like the visual interpretation of what the songs are trying to do?
I think it was Tommy. It's... Like I was saying before, Tommy's more of a linear story and easier to follow. While the visuals are all over the place, it does have a kind of over-the-top centric theme that it follows. And yeah, and I definitely feel like overall it is a bit more concise. Whereas with The Wall, you have all the different live action stuff, and then you also have the animated parts, which just go off the deep end with different visuals. That can kind of throw you off if you're not necessarily prepared for it. Whereas with Tommy, it's there is no animated parts and stuff like that. So overall, I think it is a bit more, like I said, concise. It is more put together. But noticing your next question, which one's the boldest, that definitely goes to The Wall. They're definitely going for a lot more. While they may not hit every target that they're aiming for, I feel like the fact that they're going for so much and hitting most of it, I really think that one's definitely much more of a bolder visually than I think Tommy.
But here's the thing: does bold make it better? And that sometimes is the question I keep asking myself. Like, I'll kind of jump the gun just because I feel like I will get to you, Joe. But I feel like for me, I love the visuals of The Wall. Like, far beyond anything. And maybe it's because I'm a bit more biased with it. It was something that's a little bit more personal to me, and I liked my experience with that. But you're right. It's not concise. There is like, it flip-flops quite a bit. And I have a hard time sometimes with just connecting with the movie just because of those visuals. Whereas like, you're right, with Tommy, it's a bit more concise. It's flowing. It is distinct, and it owns that vision. It may not be the vision that everyone had when they first listened to Tommy, but I think Ken Russell does bring his vision to it, and he's in control of that. And because The Who just allowed him to own that, it works as a better movie. But at the same time, as much as like, as that's great, I'm just going to lean a little bit more towards The Wall, just because I don't know. It's just, I can't get that stuff of like, the animations for Goodbye Blue Sky or Waiting for the Worm to kind of like leave my head. And even just like other stuff, like where there's the famous scene with him just watching the TV alone in his room. Or Is There Anybody Out There, where he's like collecting all of his little cigarettes and building like his little, when you say cemetery, in the middle of his hotel room. That's great stuff. It's shocking, and it's alarming to me, and I don't know. I like that.
Yeah, and I think that part of what makes, I think, Tommy a little bit more cohesive is the fact the differences in how production went for each of the movies. And so I felt like a lot of the issues that they ran into with The Wall did end up showing on screen in the visuals. While, they had big ideas on what they wanted to go for, but with, too many voices trying to talk and too many very controlling people trying to drive the ship, it ended up a bit all over the place. And I definitely didn't help, in the movie in general, but specifically the visuals and how they were portrayed. Whereas with, like I said, with Tommy, you have Ken Russell, who's already an established director. He already knows what he's doing. And I think it seems like it's more like The Who had Ken Russell direct it and then kind of stayed out of his way a little bit as far as like visuals go. Whereas it sounds like Roger Waters was kind of had his hand in everything, or at least tried to get his hand in everything. And I feel like that muddied the visuals up a bit.
So Joe, what do you say?
So Pink Floyd's The Wall is absolutely the bolder one.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect boldness. I like it when filmmakers, and I mean, in this case, not necessarily just a filmmaker, but I like it when filmmakers take big swings, even if they miss, because I think in general in Hollywood today, we need more people willing to experiment and do big, weird things, because that's how you find new trends. That's how you find new storytelling ideas, and you get new ideas on screen, is by doing something that nobody else has done before. But it is a mess of a movie. It's a big, bold movie, but it's not nearly as cohesive as Tommy. In Tommy, Ken Russell is doing what he can do in his sleep, which is this big, bold, in-your-face, symbolic style. And so, for him, that's not necessarily quote-unquote bold, but it's kind of a market that he's cornered, and he's hitting it right on the dot. Whereas with The Wall, it's this kind of big experimental thing that it feels like I'm listening to an album where I'm more interested in some tracks than others. And at a certain point in The Wall, it doesn't feel very cohesive. And it's like, all right, now we're doing this song. Now we're doing this song. Now we're doing this song. Whereas in Tommy, it's, one song leads into the next, and the story continues. And in The Wall, it's like, okay, this section I'm really interested in, but not this section. And I can see myself, if I was to ever really sit down to watch this again, I'd probably just skip around to my favorite scenes, my favorite songs.
Not gonna lie, that's what I kind of did the second time around. I just kind of skipped to the parts that I liked, and I kind of fast forward to the other parts that were just like boring.
It feels like a collection of music videos as opposed to a movie, and part of that is because it is very, I want to say experimental kind of, but all of the songs and even the themes themselves don't really feel like they flow together. I feel like there are several different ideas in this movie, and they don't necessarily mesh. I mean, I get that we're following this guy, and his emotional state goes from, one thing to the next. You have his dad at the beginning, and you have his relationship problems, and then you see him trying to kind of work through those relationship problems with this whole Nazi thing in his head. But they all feel like very isolated ideals that weren't put together very well as a cohesive whole.
Yeah, and you can feel like Alan Parker's trying, but there's no flow to it. Which honestly, I'll give Alan Parker credit. At least he tried, because I don't know if you guys know about the original production of the tour for The Wall, but half of the show is just the band sitting behind a wall. Like, they're constructing a wall. They build this entire wall on stage, and then the band just stays behind it throughout the whole show.
That sounds very boring.
Yeah, and imagine this is what Roger Waters wanted to bring to the movie is, I just want that. And it's like,
that doesn't translate.
No, it does not translate for film. So I got to give the movie credit for giving us something as opposed to nothing.
Even a concert movie shows you things on stage.
At least that, yeah. So let's go into the final verdict. Which one is the better adaptation movie? Alex?
Better adaptation?
It's Saturday night. You're going to recommend someone to watch one of these movies, or you're going to sit down and watch one of them yourselves. Which is the winner?
Yeah.
There's different answers for each.
Yes, there is. But what are you leaning towards? Like,
if I'm going to recommend a movie for someone to watch, they've never seen either, I'm going to recommend a movie. I'm going to recommend Tommy. It's overall an easier movie to just pick up and watch. Definitely a lot more lighthearted. and it's a better adaptation of the album, in my opinion. That being said, if I'm going to watch one of the two, I'm going to go back and watch The Wall, because I feel like The Wall is the kind of movie where you're not going to pick up on everything the first run through, and you want to watch it again to really kind of start putting together the pieces of, these visuals with this song, they match up in this way. So, yeah, like I said, Tommy's an easier movie to follow, but The Wall has a lot more to say. You just really gotta play connect the dots, and it's not an easy game to play.
It's the meat and potatoes versus the waffles.
Or the
Yes.
meat and the pudding. Which one are you gonna have first?
That's a good point. Yeah.
The wall is the meat and Tommy is the pudding.
Well, I'm gonna kind of cut to the chase. I'd rather have the pudding and not the meat. I actually would go with Tommy, honestly.
Yeah.
Actually, kind of watching these movies again. I mean, originally I was thinking, I'm gonna find myself wanting to recommend The Wall to people, and then I'm like, no, I'd rather recommend Tommy to people, because I agree with you, Alex. It's fun, it's lighthearted, but if you're looking for like something of a good like adaptation of a rock opera, it fits that criteria. The Wall is it is very kind of abstract in its ideas, but it's not a shared vision. And because of that's where it falls. It doesn't really become anything except just what it tried to get onto screen, which is something, but maybe it's too deep for people to get. Whereas with Tommy, it's really what a rock opera should be. It's fun. There's music just showing the person on his journey, and it's just executed very well. Even though Ken Russell may not be everyone's favorite director, he's not mine, but I appreciate his vision for this. So I think he made a better movie.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is just like it comes down to, I guess, what kind of music you want to listen to.
That too, yeah.
Tommy's a lot more eccentric and upbeat. The Wall is a little bit more downtrodden, and it does have its moments here and there, but it's not as maybe exciting is the right word. I'm not entirely sure. It's definitely not as upbeat as Tommy is, and both movies kind of reflect that in their own way as well. Whereas, like I said, Tommy's it's enjoyable to watch. It could be a bit of an eyesore at times, but at least it's enjoyable and it keeps you going. Whereas The Wall can be at times a bit of a slog to get through. There's more to it, but it requires a lot more of the viewer to really pull out what they want.
And kind of a lot more just to brace themselves before watching. Because if you're not expecting to see
a vagina flower,
anus for a judge, it's. What about you, Joe? What do you say?
I mean, you know what I'm going to say.
I know what you're going to say, but we just want to hear why you say that.
The Wall is not greater than the sum of its parts. It's a bunch of individually fascinating, breathtaking segments that don't equal to a very engaging whole for me. Tommy is just a rousing, bombastic, provocative experience from beginning to end. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend Tommy to pretty much anyone before I'd recommend The Wall. Not saying The Wall is bad. The Wall is very good. I've been kind of down on it the whole time, but if I was to recommend one of these two to anybody, I would recommend Tommy. And if I was to sit down and watch one of these again, I would absolutely sit through Tommy all the way through, beginning to end. Because even though I like some songs more than others, it's just every single song bangs just like right there for me, you know? And I mean, I think for just if you're into film history or if you're into Pink Floyd, of course, if you're into Pink Floyd, you probably watched it already. And if you're into film history, it's kind of a must see. But Tommy is the winner, the easy winner for me here.
Was anyone really shocked that Tommy was rated PG when they saw this?
I guess a little bit, yeah.
I didn't know what it was rated before I started watching it, and I think like halfway through, it was during the Uncle Ernie scene. I looked up the rating, I'm like, oh, it was a PG.
Yeah, I mean, besides the Uncle Ernie scene, I think the As a Queen segment is kind of like a little bold or even too much for its time. But
well, and there's a little bit of nudity in the background of a shot too, but that's nothing for 70s PG.
Was this released before or after they started doing PG-13?
Oh, this was like before.
Way before. PG-13 was in the 80s. This was 70s.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like this Tommy probably would have earned a probably PG-13 just for some of the imagery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we have movie moments? I didn't think of one ahead of time. I forgot to.
Well, I guess if anything, one of my favorite movie moments from Tommy in general is the Cousin Kevin scene and the pinball wizard scene. Only because Cousin Kevin is just so outrageous and the visuals match with what the lyrics are saying, but then when you see him on the screen, it's hilarious.
Dude, he's got an actual swastika drawn on his jacket, and he's wearing an iron cross necklace. Like, geez, dude, come on.
I think that scene is where a lot of just Ken Russell's humor as a director just comes through. And I think that was the one thing that just kind of got me into this movie. It's like, okay, I'm digging this. This is outrageous, but I love this. And then I guess for the wall, the one scene that I think still sticks out to me is like middle segment of empty spaces. And what do we do now is like my favorite part.
My movie moment for Tommy is either going to be also the pinball scene, because it's a lot of fun to watch. But I also really liked the church scene early on with Eric Clapton. I thought that was great.
I mean, were you expecting him to show up?
I knew he was in the movie. I just didn't know where he was going to be in the movie. And then when I saw him, like, wait, I know that person. I've seen them before.
You're pretty much like throughout that. I think after that moment, you're just trying to like be on the edge of your toes. Like, okay, who's going to show up next? Who's going to show up next?
Yeah. I was like, where is Elton John? I know he's somewhere. And then for the wall, I would say, I can't remember if it's the first animated scene, but it is the one where the dove gets blown apart by the big iron eagle. And
yeah, so it's the Goodbye Blue Sky. Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was forgetting it. Yeah, and that part is really cool. I think some of the strongest moments in the wall are the animated scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So for the wall, I'm going to go ahead and say Goodbye Blue Skies as well. That was the one that was the moment of the movie that really hooked me in, and I was just kind of fascinated by the style of animation too, especially for the time. Perfect scene right there. Tommy, I was going to say the Acid Queen song because it's kind of my go-to moment of the movie. That's just this sensory enveloping moment of, color and surreal imagery and symbolism. Just kind of it's Ken Russell and the Who and everything kind of thrown into a blender to give us the most visually striking moment in the movie. But I'm gonna say Bernie's Holiday Camp.
Really?
Because, I mean, it's not by any means the best song in the movie, but that's the moment where this kind of bouncy rhythm comes in and you introduce Oliver Reed. And Oliver Reed is coming in a completely different flavor of character from anything I've ever seen him do. I've seen him do rebellious characters like this before, but most of the time he's in these more insidious kind of dramatic roles. And this one felt, I mean, I don't want to say vulgar, but over the top and comical, yet you could kind of feel there's something a little bit dark about this guy. And you're introducing Tommy, and then you also have all of the choreography coming in. So it's not the best scene in the movie, and it's not the best musical moment in the movie, not the best song, but it's kind of the moment where everything clicked with me of, oh, I'm going to love this movie. And I was on board for everything afterwards. It was perfect tone for that scene, and just introducing Oliver Reed was the cherry on top.
Awesome, guys. Well, I put you through a lot. I made you guys listen to 2 rock albums, but I am very happy that we finally got around to doing this.
We did it. Yeah. We survived.
I'm honestly happy I finally got around to listening to them too.
Yeah, see, that was another silver lining on this. Now you guys got some musical history.
So that'll do it for this episode of the Film Illiterates podcast. Alex, next week, it is your turn to pick. What have you chosen for us to watch?
Feels good, man. We're going to watch the documentary on Pepe the Frog.
Oh boy.
Last year.
This will be fun.
This is going to be an interesting one. Yeah.
This will either gain or lose us a bunch of subscribers.
I'm pretty sure just with us mentioning Pepe the Frog, we've already lost another half. That's it. It's like the stock market. We dipped.
So tune in next episode as we go from rock operas to rock bottom with Feels Good, man. Alex, where can people find you?
You can find me on Letterboxd, Rate Your Music, and my anime list on the name of Half Scrim. You can also find me on Twitter at Alex D. Patton.
Nate?
You can find me here at Film Illiterates. I do these podcasts and videos with these guys. And I'm also on Instagram at Nathan_Stone_films. You can also follow me at Starlord Rules on Instagram, but I'm also on Letterboxd under Ivan Claysberg.
And you can find me on Twitter at Film Illiterates and letterboxd.com under the username Film Illiterates. And you find all of our previous videos and podcast episodes on filmilliterates.com and youtube.com/filmilliterates. Keep watching movies and keep it easy.